Good morning to you. It's morning here. I don't know if it's afternoon, evening, or the middle of the night for you there. Sometimes when I watch other people, it's the middle of the night. I am so encouraged today because of what I see in productivity in a few of my friends that is enhanced productivity from what I had noticed before. It's hard to be productive in a world with so many voices and so much dissonance all around us. And today we're going to talk about the church and how we keep score in the church. That is one of the most significant questions that we have. I don't get out to conferences as much as I used to, but whenever I get to a place where a bunch of pastors tend to gather, I always try to force myself to do something that's not innate to me and go up and say hello to people and start a relationship with them. What I have noticed is that they need to be asking the question of themselves, why are you cast down in such turmoil, my soul? That's from David in Psalm 42. He says it twice, like, what's going on inside of me? And I confess that some days I'm not sure. And other days I am absolutely sure. And I realize now that as I look back upon so many things in my lifetime over later high school years, going off into the college and then into ministry and then into blending in some business activities with it, and had some good times and some bad times. And I've often said, why is turmoil? What's going on? And honestly, sometimes it's because of the stuff between my ages and my 2 ears. I'm just not thinking straight. I'm contemplating things that are just not honoring to God or that are confusing, so on. Today, we're going to look at how we keep score. And I've noticed since a very long time ago that I don't think that most Christian leaders are taking score adequately. That's because I believe they're using worldly values. I don't mean that in a terrible, sinful way, but I just mean values that they picked up from the society around us and have followed through on them and sought to apply them to church life. Now, there are lots of things that you can learn from in the society around you, wherever it is, that will apply to church life. But I have been doing that thinking, gone back over many decades and looked at key mountaintops in my experience in terms of people that I have resonated with. And today we're going to look into one of them, and I hope that it will be a big advantage to you. I am working on this book, got several chapters written, got to rewrite them, sort them out, and trying to make sure that I speak things as accurately as I can. And I call it the ordinary church advantage. I think ordinary churches have some tremendous advantages today, and as always, that those leaders fail to see. When I go to those conferences and I talk to people and they kind of have their chin on their kneecaps and they're not feeling very successful and things are difficult, and it may or may not be true that they're successful, but they're certainly not wise to compare themselves with the other people around them. They've got to stay in their own lane and do their own thing and become really useful. And I think that there's lots of advantages, and that's what we're going to cover in this book, but doing it from looking at some things that others have written quite some time ago. So I hope that we'll get this book together at some point soon. I find myself constantly wanting to polish and edit, and I want to get it out there for you because I really believe that the best thing for the ordinary church is just think of not revolution, not breaking up all the furniture and throwing things away, but gradually working with people, paying more attention to the relationships and the development of that than the development of the programs. How do you personally keep score as to what's a successful church? How would you define a successful church? Generally speaking, people would define successful as big. Now, big is not necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily good. So what are the measuring points? What's the scoreboard? What meter sticks? I'm a Canadian, so I should speak in meters and not yards. What yardsticks do you use to measure whether or not, in your opinion, a church is doing well? Um, what leaders do you follow? I tend to think that people love to follow the best public communicators who may or may not be the best leaders to follow, because you learn over the years that sometimes the guys who get lots of accolades as being great communicators, underneath, there's this soft underbelly of a lack of character. And it's so disheartening when you see that. Of course, you don't want to become one of them, neither do I. Uh, when you think of keeping score, what limits do you keep on your own world that says, oh, I would score better if so and so and such and such? Most people think that the world is not employing them as it should. And they also think that is that most, I can't remember the exact number, but a great proportion of people feel like the world is not employing them to their best. They're not getting the best of their life. And they also tend to think, many people tend to think that other people think less of them than they do, and don't have the confidence to believe that they're appreciated by other people. Now, that partly is so because other people don't often give you praise any more than your children do. Uh, but they do appreciate you, and after you're gone, and they will, in fact, especially at your funeral, attend your own funeral and pay attention to what they say. That'll be encouraging for you. Should have had that 20 years ago, right? But people will look on the things that you did contribute, and it may be more than you know. Yeah. What opportunities do we miss because we think, if only I had another dollar, if only I had another hour, if only, if only. And all you can do is all you can do. And all you can do, if you do it in faith and follow the Lord, that's just quite enough. And you will one day get at least pretty good, if not well done, and good and faithful servant. Now, Dave, I want to follow up a little bit. A man who's been around for a long time, spent, more than a cup of coffee, I guess it was a pot of coffee, in Canada working at Tyndale University. And you might read some of his stuff in Christianity Today. He's still out there, retired from full-time ministry, but he was an interesting man to me because he wrote a book way back in the day, The Problem with Wineskins. Now, as I think about it, I'm not so sure that metaphor is particularly useful, even though Jesus used it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's relevant in the Middle East and maybe in some other countries, but people don't stitch up lambs, they call them fur, not the fur, but the skin, and make them watertight so that they can have wine in there. But he talked about the problem of wineskins. So as Jesus talked about it, that when they put wine in one of those skins, it would have this natural releasing of gas and expand as it fermented. And Jesus said, you're a real dummy if you put new wine in old wineskins, because it doesn't have any stretching capacity left to it. And I fear that in every age, the church has less and less, as it goes on, less and less capacity to expand and accept new forms and new ways. You will have your preferences, and that's, some of them are based on Scripture, to be sure, but often you'll find that they're really just your preferences, just something you like, you don't eat broccoli and get beat up for it if you're president of the United States. You have your preferences, and that's like a wineskin is no longer capable of expanding and trying new flavors and so on. I'm not too sure about the title, but what I am sure about is something interesting here that you'll notice up in the corner there. It says it's the 40th anniversary edition. And this is just put together a few years back, originally published in 1975. But look at that subtitle. Isn't that interesting? Church structure in a technological age. Oh, we think that we're in the technological age. And can you think about this? 1975, he wrote that. Before there was a personal computer, we knew that there were computers out there where they were big things over there that did stuff and we didn't have access to them. There was no Google. There were no cell phones. There was so much that wasn't technological. And yet, 40 years after he published this book, he republished it to say we still got the same problems. So just like we went through the master plan of evangelism and said, well, why didn't it work? Snyder kind of interfaces with Colvin in the way he approaches the life of the church. And I want to say some of the things that he said, but extend upon what he said today. This isn't a book review. You can go and get the book for yourself, and I may misstate exactly what he's saying, although I'm trying hard to remember exactly what he said. Fundamentally, the wine Jesus referred to is quite clearly the gospel itself, the content. And the wineskins are the man-made structures around them. Now, the Pharisees were saying, well, why don't your disciples behave in a certain way? And he said, I'll get back to that later, according to Luke. Luke has the most extensive explanation of this saying of Jesus. But the skin expands, it gets brittle, and eventually it's useless. Yeah, you'll throw it away and use a new wineskin. But the wine endures, the content endures, the container can change. And that's true in every age. Now, there's nothing wrong with having structure. Another book that we're going to look at tends to diminish the need for structure. I maintain you've got to have structure, not over structure, but if you're going to have, and I like to say, a group of people are going to get together, then you have to have a date and a time and a place. And if they don't show up on the right day of the week or the right time of the day, they won't participate. So that's structure. And expounding on that structure today is very different because we can text people and say, so you come to the meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock in the back of such and such a mom and pop restaurant. And I know of a church that meets in the back room. Have a convenience store. I think it's a Korean convenience store. I'm not sure about that. And it's a different wineskin than what people are used to. People in our society used to know what a church building was. But today, in the world in which I live, there are fewer and fewer people that even know what a church structure looks like. But if they do, they will think of it as the big cathedral on the hill, where it's this big, massive stone brick, whatever it is, structure, with this spire going up into the sky. Who does that? What's that all about? They don't know. They just think it's pretty architecture. So they really have, if you say, go to church, come to church, they'll think, well, I don't like historic buildings that much. And there is the wineskin problem that Snyder was talking about back in the day. When the skin fails, the wine still holds. And it's always wise for us to have stretchable skins whenever we can. So in Snyder, his book back in the day, had a chapter on what he called the Edifice complex. We think the building matters. And he thinks of it as a disease to put so much effort and identity into the building. Where does your church meet? Oh, we're over on First Street. The identity tied to the address. He highlights that as a problem. Problem in 1975, problem in 1995, a problem today. The early church grew rapidly. We're going to touch on that later. Without having any thought of buildings. It took a couple hundred years before they owned their own buildings. Now, I believe that buildings are, I won't say an evil, but somewhat necessary fundamentally because if a church endures and it continues to rent facilities, it will pay more for its building than it would if it kind of front-loaded and got some capital together so that they didn't have to pay rent. There's only one reason that somebody rents something to you, and that's to make money. So if the church wants to be a good steward of its money, it will have its own building. I have lots of opinions on what you can do to diminish the need for donations to have that building, because I think you can use, my favorite model is a restaurant. There are other ways, but if you have a restaurant that operates, that facility is ideal for using as a church facility. So you could double brand. We actually have a corporation, never got it out of being incorporated into the ground, called Cafe on the Way. That's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to those who know about Christianity, but it still communicates as if I'm on the way to work or on the way home or whatever it is. And to people who don't know that there's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge meaning behind it, but all the Christians should know about the meaning behind the way. So that's why we work with the name Cafe on the Way. Maybe we'll get there someday. We've never been able to get the capital together to get it started, but getting it started would, if it succeeds as a business, it will diminish the cost of the cost to the church. For example, if it's a breakfast and lunch place, and you got all afternoon and all evening to use it for other things, personal conversations, large meetings, small meetings, concerts, all kinds of things. And it's a people-sized possibility. But that's a different wineskin. Some churches have run coffee shops as an adjunct, kind of as a charity thing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that has a footprint in the society that makes really good money. It covers the cost of the building, so it's less expensive for the church. And also gives the relational capacity to the church, because if you were wearing it in my church's breakthrough pathway, if it were, I can walk around and say, "Can I fill up your cup of coffee for you?" And start a conversation with those who want to start a conversation, not sit down and say, "Since you're here, I'm going to share the gospel with you." Just start a relationship. I think it has tremendous possibilities to it. That's just my particular perspective of a different wineskin, same gospel contained. When they did get to church buildings later on, several centuries later, it got the favor of the government, and some would argue that church went downhill after that. I don't have an opinion on that. But the church does not mean the building. So that's one of the things Snyder emphasized in 75, and also when he rewrote the book 40 years later. We've got to free ourselves from the building. It must never define the church. And not having a building doesn't mean you're failing. Being in some rented facility is still not a bad idea, because the structure has to contain the content. And we're going to talk about what the content needs to be. So measuring by the size of the building or the size of the group in the building is just not something that the Bible talks about, and is something that Snyder pointed out as being a problem. Called it out. The other thing is looking at that guy on the communicator, with all those new fancy LED lights, and the band with all the people in the ripped knees under their jeans and the designer sneakers, and not just ordinary. The superstar mentality, it's so often is perpetuated by those who can do really high-end broadcasting. You can do broadcasting. I'm sitting here with a laptop computer, yours will work, The software that we're using right now is called OBS, Open Broadcasting System. I think it is OBS. It's free. It's not any cost connected with it at all. It's absolutely free. You can do everything that I've done here. Actually, right behind me is a piece of green material. You can, with the green screen effect, you even notice it around the edge of my face. You used to notice that. So you don't even need a decent background. That thing behind me, I think, cost $30. I'm using an old webcam, but I could be using an old phone. You have one of those, right? That's as good as that webcam. I just haven't gotten around to taking an old phone and putting it up there. I'm broadcasting on YouTube right now, and that's free. And it's really quite simple. Now, you got to get over the fact that you're talking to a stupid camera and not to humans, and that's really hard for some people. I've done it long enough that I've gotten used to the fact that you have to get used to the fact that I'll stumble over some of my words. It's not going to be a corporate and commercial kind of thing. The whole business of the pastor as superstar communicator in front of a stadium full of people is very much against what the Bible says. If you study Ephesians 4, it's the job of these key leaders in church, privately named, is to equip other people to get the ministry done. And so if you think of that person's, he's up there and he does a really great job. He only does a great job if he can get you off your butt and out there doing something significant in works of service. And that's how the body's built up, through the works of service. So this concentration on the pastor as the superstar is a really bad idea. Everybody has the potential for ministry. We're going to get to a significant question as we finish today. Wow, time's gone by so fast. I've got to hurry, or else I'll keep you here until the cows come home, they used to say. The ministry belongs to the people. And if the performer is good, he's good at getting the people to carry the ministry. The big meeting, the Sunday meeting, is not the church. It's not enough. It's not everything. I'm not against Sunday meetings or other days as well, and so on. And larger groups have their benefits. Snyder's quite clear on that. But the accountability, the stuff that stimulates people to get their work done, is in the smaller things. Did you make that phone call? You're not going to get past that from the platform in church, I hope. But did you? How did you do on that? Those bookshelves you were going to put up. I noticed they're not there yet. We have a problem with materials. Holding people accountable helps them serve. And if you're in a small group or a one-on-one or I love triad situation, it's really hard to hide. And it means you get more done. You know the names, I expect, Charles and John Wesley. John Wesley was the organizer. Well, Charles was the guy. He was kind of second fiddle, but in the ministry, the Wesleyan movement was huge. And he had what he called class meetings. And these were small joint groups. Every time somebody came to the Lord, he or she was inserted into a small group. And every time they met once a week, they'd say, "How you doing? Well, how you doing really?" And could have that conversation, trying to help them the bumps and grinds of life, because there's bumps and grinds in everybody's life. And that structure carried the revival forward until a generation ago, more than a generation ago. People had forgotten about another guy who had a big public ministry, but didn't organize. And perhaps you don't know his name as well. He certainly didn't form a denomination. It was George Whitefield. I had the privilege of, as a summer student, living in the home with a wonderful man, Arnold Dallimore, who, as a side thing, was writing a biography of Whitefield, which is still available today, 2 volumes, a lot of pages. I read it while the ink was still wet on it. And that set a pattern in my life of knowing that things can be done quietly. And one of his Bible college roommates from back in the 40s, I was talking with him one day, who was a wonderful man as well. I said, yeah, I'm spending the summer in such and such a village with Arnold Dallimore. He said, oh, Dallimore, will he ever get that book written? At that time, he was maybe 17 years into writing it, and it was written on an old, those big old black typewriters with lickety-clack, clickety-clack, and if you wanted to fix things, cut and paste meant you literally would cut the pages and tape them together and so on. And I learned that the written word made a difference, and the name George Whitefield had a magnificent ministry, uh, really mattered in church history. But he didn't organize. Wesley organized. Whitfield trusted the other people to do those things that he wasn't good at. And it never turned into a movement and didn't create the longevity. It was in the smaller contact that things happen. Your church needs to be an organism, just not an organization. It's got to work on the relational stuff. And sometimes people don't get along. That's life. Sometimes they really hit it off together. And there was, in when the church prospers most, there's no emphasis, not that there isn't any existence, but there's no emphasis on the church building and committees and structures, and we got to solve this problem, so we need a new program. You can probably do a lot more with whatever programs you currently have in your church. You don't need a new program. You need a new attitude within the existing programs more often than not. Putting too much emphasis on the kind of the scaffolding around that builds the building really inhibits the life of the church. This is the problem with Wineskins, and it was true when Snyder wrote it back in 75, or wrote it before and then published it in 75. Don't think about the structure as the church. And sometimes it's just going to crack. Sometimes that old skin is going to wear out, and sometimes you're just going to have to replace it. You might have to relocate, and when you relocate, there's going to be some people that's not the same anymore, and they're going to quit. You can't give in to that problem. You've got to get the whole thing right. Now, Snyder and Coleman had the same basic mindset. Coleman was saying that our methodology had failed because we didn't put enough effort, like Jesus did, into the small. And Snyder said that the failure was that we depended on the bigger containers, and both were true. The structures became the blockage to Coleman's methodology. The wineskin that we created that was actually hostile to the personal ministry. Now, why didn't the church grow as it ought to have grown in North America? Well, the building emphasis of the budget. You can hire a fundraising firm to help you raise the money to build the building. And you can get big donors who will come and they'll throw $500,000, $1 million at you. And it's like, whoa, I didn't even know they had that kind of money. But will they put $500,000 into your discipleship pipeline? If you inspire them, maybe they will. But you weren't inspiring them to the physical things. And you have to inspire them to the spiritual things. You might get the new building, but if you've got turmoil amongst the staff, turmoil will spread itself out through the congregation, whether you like it or not. Something had to give. And usually the structures broke down and continue to break down. Now, I'm promising you that by the time I get through this series, we're going to have some small shifts and things you can do that makes a difference. Not just identifying the problem. You have to have good diagnosis, but identifying what to do. So what are the ways in which we should keep score? We've been keeping score by nickels and noses. Not smart. Nickels and noses, and is there an N word for bricks? No, not smart. The main scoreboards that the Bible talks about include these 4 things. Love is the primary. If your building isn't promoting love, if it's promoting awesomeness but not individual love, then you've got the wrong scoreboard. If it's not producing, if your structure, the way you go about things isn't building the fruit of the Spirit out of people, and you know that passage from Galatians 5, and you're not measuring the right scoreboard. You need to be looking at that person and say, are they more sacrificial than they used to be? Do they actually pay attention to the needs of others? Or do they say, yeah, I don't like the music. I don't like this. I think the pastor's sermon is too long. I don't do. How are they doing? And actually showing that fruit, one fruit, several evidences that Paul talks about in Galatians. And then the multiplication factor is a factor, the mathematical factor. Is your church multiplying? It's kind of an axiom, and I can't prove it statistically, but churches that start other churches do so disproportionately in the first 3 years of their own existence. Church has been around for 40, 50, 100 years and have never started another church. Multiplication was there. Love is the sign. Jesus named it. That's how the outsiders, the best marketing program you can ever have is outsiders noticing that you people love one another. The fruit is the way we measure. John says, without me, you can do nothing. Jesus said, he's the vine. Jesus said, I'm the vine and you are the branches. And this character formation matters in the life of individuals. I don't care how good the guitar player is. I really don't care. But I do care how much that guitar player is maybe noticing that disabled member in the wheelchair and gets down on one knee and has a conversation with. That's the kind of stuff that makes the difference. And in the Great Commission, it's quite clear that the target we're working on here is to get obedience to all that Jesus said. I got so many things I put together on what the Bible expects of us, and I don't think that people have a good fix on that. It's kind of a foggy idea. And attendance is just one thing. Faithfulness matters. And multiplication is always the focus. That's what Paul talks about in 2 Timothy 2:2. The leaders raising up leaders. So if that superstar is putting down all of his staff and being difficult rather than raising them up to carry the work forward, and he's not following the correct scoreboard. The result will be, if we follow through what Paul talks about, a mature church, a mature group who are working together, supporting each other. It's so hard to carry things along. In the book of Acts, the word did keep advancing. And some say, well, it was all about the message. I might say, not anymore, not many. And it's all about the numbers. No, it's not. There are 18 references, one every chapter and a half about in the book of Acts, to numbers. So obviously numbers matter to Luke, and I think they should matter to us. We start with 120 and use 3,000 on Pentecost, then 5,000. Then eventually we get the report that myriads, and the word means 10,000. A myriad is a 10,000, are coming to faith in Christ. It grew exponentially. And if you're not working in a thing that's exponentially working today, something's wrong. It could be the wrong season. That's a possibility. Could be the wrong method. That's a possibility. It could be that you are not the person that you ought to be, and you're concentrating on the wrong stuff. That's a possibility as well. There are lots of possibilities, but in Acts, the word kept going forward because they were full of enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, theos in the middle of God. They're full of God. They're just exploding with joy. The book of Acts, not just the numbers, but the book of Acts also it talks about the message. Actually, in the book of Acts, there are 37 different messaging events. So the message is obviously important. I actually kind of transcribed 21 full speeches. That's really something in 28 chapters, isn't it? That you've got full speeches and then you've got message summaries that going together. So the message absolutely is foundational, but also the numbers matter. It's both and, it's not either or. It is about the message. It is about the numbers. It's not one or the other. Acts is the example of blending the two beautifully. Acts is just really the description of what was going on, not so much a prescription, but it set the pattern to say, you go out there, you make your own prescription for your own situation going forward. And that's what we need to redo today. Now, Snyder was saying the container as to the contents. So how big's your church? What number would you get? You'd give an average of Sunday morning attendance. Well, first of all, twice as many people, roughly speaking, say your church is their church home than will be there on any given Sunday except special Sunday. Do you say, well, our church is doing really well? We have started X number of small groups in the last year. Or, our pastor's telling us that he's investing out time. We support him so much on this. 4 afternoons a week with some young men who may be ready to go into ministries, not sure yet. You know what? We're raising up workers. Every worker in our church is looking into their personal network and getting someone come along and help them. And, in the nursery, they show up after the Sunday morning meeting and they help wash the toys off and put them back in their place and so on. Are you reporting on that stuff? Because those are the things that tell you how the church is really doing. So what? Well, we have to put money and effort into raising up others. Might use the word mentoring. Now, the meeting place is secondary. It's not that it shouldn't be taken care of. It absolutely should. Your flower gardens matter to you and they matter to everybody else. So get out there and stir up some mud if that's the only thing you can think of doing. Just, ask permission. Don't wait until they come and beat you up with a stick and say, are you going to come to the work day and help us fix this place up? Shouldn't necessarily need a work day in the life of your church. If the shelves are dirty, say, to one of the deacons, would it be okay if I got the junk off of those shelves? And you know who that belongs to? Like there are things that everybody can do, even the physical things, that make a difference. But it's secondary to what's going on personally. A bigger church is not necessarily better. It's not necessarily worse. All these other things are the things that need to be measured. Containers are always going to be necessary. We can't throw them away. So what are you going to do? Well, set your expectations. So when somebody says, how's your church doing? Tell them the truth, but focus on the things that Jesus would have focused on, that Paul would have focused on. And if there's tough conversations and telling the truth isn't always what you wish it was, don't disclose things that shouldn't be disclosed, but tell the truth. But I want you to come back next week. I want you to come with a friend. You can get some practice doing the kinds of things that matter in the growing the church today, the things that Coleman and Snyder wanted you to focus on. Coleman's with the Lord now, Snyder's still there. Maybe he didn't even hear about your ministry because you change, just tweak the focus a little bit. It starts from the top. Martin Luther King said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? He said this several times, and one more famous time than others. And that's a really good question. I'm not sure it's the most persistent and urgent question. I don't know that it's persistent, but I do believe it's urgent. What are you doing for others? What are you doing in your job of fitting into this great kingdom that expands? You know what? In the New Testament, it never mentions individual churches in terms of their number. It mentions they meet in houses, and so those 3,000 converts on the day of Pentecost, they didn't continue to meet as one church, and there wasn't some senior leader running around with a stick trying to guard the perimeter of church to make sure that the church to meet so he couldn't lose any of his 3,000 people. No, they probably, as there's evidence, their meals house to house, they had that small built within the big. And life's most urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And raising up the next generation of leaders. Do what you can do. It's a simple thing. Somebody who should hear this lesson, pass it on. You can get together with them. Say, let's get together and sit down and let's sit in our car in the park and we'll just watch it on YouTube. Like it's this. I don't know what your excuses are, but get over it and do what God called you to do. And I think there will be a tremendous work that happens because you demonstrate some passion and some enthusiasm. We got so much to say going forward about the character traits that we ought to be measuring to see if somebody should be elevated to a greater place in ministry. We've got this book that we've done and some other things that are coming that will help you, but it won't help you on a shelf. It'll help you if you think it through. And if you need somebody to talk to, I'm available as often as I can make myself available, which isn't as much as it used to be. And I can connect you with somebody else that will help you. And you can now do it electronically if you're separated by miles. But you can meet person to person and make a big difference in people's lives and never know what the end result will be. I go back into my life and I think of the few people who helped me when I was trying to sort out my own identity. And they said, maybe God will use you. And I'm, really? You think so? And it changed me. You can change others. And I'm trusting that you will. And I'm really hoping that I'll see you next week.